People have been asking me to do a video on the Jedi for years. I've avoided it up to now because my channel deals with serious societal problems that need to be addressed. I didn't want to do a video making light of such a serious issue, but after talking to Mr. Atheist, I decided to finally do it. Sometimes it's hard to continue to engage with this stuff without breaking down and crying, so let's do something a little more lighthearted for once. And aside from that, all these points still do apply to cults more generally, so it'll be a good exercise in identifying other harmful groups. So let's take a look at this. Is the Jedi Order a cult? Let's get into it. So obviously in the movies, the Jedi are actually correct about their beliefs. That's objectively verifiable, and while some normal people seem to dispute it from time to time, even their mortal enemies, the Sith, don't dispute its validity. They just dispute their approach. The Jedi believe in being calm, the Sith believe in using anger, but both produce results. By using this mysterious power which both Sith and Jedi seem to be able to harness, you can move things around with your mind, you can shoot lightning from your hands, some even have precognition, telepathy, super speed, stealth, mind control, and when you die, in some cases, you get to live on as a ghost and interact with the real world. So here's the age-old question. Does a religion being true justify bad behavior? If Jehovah's Witnesses were right, would they be justified in doing all the terrible stuff they do? Or Scientology? No, of course not. That's ridiculous. So let's take a look at some of the underhanded, questionable tactics the Sith, and more importantly, the Jedi, use on their people. The battle between the Sith and the Jedi is obviously a parallel between good and evil. The idea the writers were putting forward is that being calm and rational is moral, and being angry is evil. Anger will eat you alive. Now, that's a pretty good life lesson from which I think we can all derive benefit. But again, there are some moral commandments from the Bible that could be valuable to people. That doesn't make the Bible inherently valuable. It has lots of harmful stuff in it too. There are a couple of models we use to determine if a group is harmful, so let's take a look at them. The first one is the influence continuum. Does the group try to replace your identity with a new identity? For example, do they want to modify your behavior with rewards and punishments to turn you into somebody that's more useful to the group? The Jedi most definitely do this. They want people who can block their emotions completely when they need to. Does the group employ conditional love, i.e., if you leave, will you be shunned or mistreated in some way? When I think about the Jedi versus the Sith, I think it's similar to how Jehovah's Witnesses view apostates. They view them as evil and mentally diseased. People don't usually just leave the Jedi Order and live normal lives after. You're either all in or all out. Black and white, good versus evil. There's no middle ground with the Jedi. So I'd definitely say conditional love plays into this. Do they encourage dependence and obedience? Yes, to an extreme degree. Here's another key point on the influence continuum, which applies to the Jedi. Checks and balances. There aren't any checks and balances for the Jedi Council. If you remember, in the movies, they refused to accept Anakin at first. They kept saying he was too old. He had a quality that was too much like the other extremists. And that brings me to another point. They love to bring kids in. They want to get them in as early as possible so they're in it for life. Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, Catholics, and just about every other extremist denomination out there does the same shit. There are a few points on the influence continuum that show that the Jedi are influencing people in a fairly healthy, constructive way, but largely their influence is negative and destructive. Now let's take a look at the bite model and pick out some key points that apply to the Jedi Order. For those who might not know, the bite model was created by Stephen Hassan. It's a model we use to determine if something is a cult or not. It's an acronym that stands for behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotion control. So let's start at behavior control and see how the Jedi line up. Here's the first point under behavior control. Promote dependence and obedience. This one's a little complicated because it depends. They ultimately want their people to be self-sufficient and useful to the group, but leading up to the point you become a master, you basically have to prostrate yourself to the master you serve under. Follow all their orders and instructions unquestioningly. I'm assuming everybody watching this has a good idea of the structure of the Jedi Order, but in case you don't, let me elaborate a little bit. Padawans start out young, and they train under either a Jedi Knight or a Jedi Master. A Jedi Knight is somebody who's been granted knighthood after successfully going through the trials. The trials include the Trial of Skill, which is a 3-part assessment testing physical, mental, and combat challenges. The Trial of Courage is really dangerous, and usually if you face down a Sith Lord or something, you automatically pass. But but they did have simulated tests since the Sith were dead for so long. Then there's the trial of the flesh. In this trial, you have to overcome extreme physical pain, hardship, or loss of some sort. Sometimes it would end in the trial taker being killed or torn apart. Then there's the trial of spirit, which is where they have to go on a quest of self-discovery, looking deep in their souls. The idea is to find out if you have any darkness in your heart, i.e., are you going to become the enemy of the group you're joining? And finally, there's the trial of insight. This one was designed to give them the ability to sense things around them in a very subtle way. So anyways, do they promote dependence and obedience? It's part of the apprenticeship, so yes, I'd say they do. Next point, modify behavior with rewards and punishments. They definitely do this. This is one of the main factors in my mind. They want to make sure that your personality is one that'll be useful to the group, and they couldn't be more obvious about it. Control clothing and hairstyle. Just look at what apprentices look like. They're carbon copies of each other, and those stupid robes they all wear. They look like members of Heaven's Gate. Restrict leisure time and activities. Your entire life revolves around the group and what they need from you. This one is pretty blatant. Require you to seek permission for major decisions. Being a Jedi means you're forbidden from attachments or possessions, because it could lead to jealousy and fear of loss, which ultimately leads to you becoming the enemy of the Jedi. If you remember, Anakin's relationship with Padme was super scandalous, so every aspect of your life is heavily controlled by this group. Okay, that was all of behavior control. Now let's look at information control. Forbid you from speaking with ex-members and critics. This one is obvious. Just look at how Jedi get along with Sith. They fight like siblings, or like mortal enemies, whichever. Discourage access to non-cult sources of information. I mean, they have an entire school dedicated to teaching you the correct way, quote unquote. So I'd say this one applies too. Divide information into insider versus outsider doctrine. The Jedi cannot stand the Sith, or anything they have to say. This one should be pretty obvious. If there's anybody the Jedi hate, it's definitely the Sith and anything the Sith have to say. Encourage you to spy and report on others' misconduct. This one should be pretty self-evident too. They don't play around with the dark side. The moment Palpatine was found out, it was reported to the Jedi Order and people were sent to arrest him. Okay, next is thought control. Instill black versus white, us versus them, good versus evil thinking. The entire story is built around good versus evil. They max out the scale on this one. I mean, they even call it the light side and the dark side. They could be called a cult just for this point alone. Change your identity, possibly even your name. They very clearly change your identity. I talked about this earlier, but they want people to give up on possessions or attachments, and they modify their behavior to make them more malleable, humble, and calm. Just listen to the Jedi Code. There is no emotion, there is peace. There is no ignorance, there is knowledge. There is no passion, there is serenity. There is no chaos, there is harmony. There is no death, there is the Force. And listen to the oath they give when they're sworn in as Jedi. I do swear on my honor and on the faith of the Brotherhood of Knights to use the Force only for good, denying, turning always from the dark side, to dedicate my life to the cause of freedom and justice. If I should fail of this vow, my life shall be forfeit, here and hereafter. That's some serious shit. If I don't follow the instructions of this group, then my life is forfeit. That goes a little beyond shunning. Use loaded language and cliches to stop complex thought. Everything that comes out of Obi-Wan Kenobi's mouth is a cliche. It's disgusting. Induce hypnotic or trance states to indoctrinate. The Jedi Order is big on self-discipline and meditation. It's required to become a Jedi. I definitely call that inducing hypnotic or trance-like states. Allow only positive thoughts. If any of these applied as much as black and white good versus evil thinking, it would be this one. They swear off physical possessions so they don't feel jealousy or loss. It's ridiculous. Does not get more extreme than this. And finally, emotional control. Label some emotions as evil, worldly, sinful, or wrong. They train their people for years to avoid certain emotions. Again, they take this one to such an extreme degree that I would call them a cult for this alone. Teach emotion-stopping techniques to prevent anger or homesickness. Holy hell, it's like this model for cults was written specifically with the Jedi in mind. Seriously, do I need to say any more about this one? And then the last two. Shun you if you disobey or disbelieve, and teach that there's no happiness or peace outside the group. I really don't know what to say about that. The Jedi are very obviously a cult. I mean, in the sequels, people call it Darth Vader's ancient religion. Whether it's true or not, it's very obviously a religion. And I feel pretty confident in my assessment that it's a group that uses destructive influence to manipulate the personalities of its members. It's a cult. I'm sorry guys, I don't like it any more than you do. Just don't join the Jedi Order. In fact, avoid the Jedi at all costs. Emotions are not evil, and they shouldn't be attempting to block them. In all seriousness though, as I said, this one was a little more lighthearted because I feel like I'm always talking about dark shit on here. I wanted something that was a little positive for once. And the ideas still apply to the real world, so give it some thought. If you see a group using some of these tactics on their members, then you should be very wary. It could be a cult. Anyways, that's all I've got for you. If you like what I do and you want to make sure I can continue to do it, you can support me in a few ways. First, you can support me on Patreon. That's probably the best way. But if you want to get something back for your support, you can check out my Teespring. I'm trying to make a shirt design for every cult I've covered. I haven't gotten every one, but I'm working on it. So check it out and see if your cult is up there. Second, you can support me by checking out my game shop. I sell controller, cartridge, and game box stands for every system from the original Nintendo and Sega Game Gear to the Xbox One and Nintendo Switch. So give that a look too. And finally, if you want to support me in some way other than monetarily, you can check out my other YouTube channels. I have a retro game channel where I answer questions like, why does Shy Guy have a mask? And why are CRT TVs the best way to play retro games? I also have the podcast where I talk about stuff I don't feel I can say on a monetized channel. And finally, I have my main channel where I talk about cults. I wish I didn't have to worry about dancing around subjects carefully in the first place, but I chose to do this as a full-time job, so unfortunately I rely on YouTube's AdSense and on the support of patrons to continue doing the work I do. Anyways, check me out in all those places if you haven't already. Thanks for listening, guys.